On the island of Matanui, 6 mighty Toa must rise against evil. To succeed, they must join forces and find the Kanoi masks of power. 6 heroes, 1 destiny.
Bionicles was one of my favorite toys growing up, but I mean, who didn't like Bionicles? They were these cool robot action figures and you could take them apart and rebuild them in any way possible, any wacky combination that you could think of. And you might be able to tell by all these pictures, but I had quite a few Bionicles, and I still kind of do. And I mean, they had everything. They had cars, bikes, they had ones that looked like spiders, they had big ones. They had so many different kinds of them. What if I told you that Bionicle is the reason that LEGO stands today? And you're probably saying, oh, that's crazy, that's not believable, but instead of just me telling you, let me show you. Founded in 1932 by Danish carpenter Ole Kurt Christensen, LEGO's fame was like a rocket ship soaring into the sky, completely made out of bricks. But it actually didn't start out with the bricks that we have today. It instead started out with this. Yeah, so actually a bunch of the early LEGOs were made out of wood since, you know, the founder was a carpenter by trade. Kind of made sense. Something else that I found interesting is the word LEGO is the combination of the words leg goat. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It also kind of sounds like an Elden Ring or Dark Souls boss, but together that means play well, which makes sense. It's kind of cute. I like the name of it. And as crazy as it sounds, throughout these early years, Christensen actually struggled to keep the company afloat and almost went bankrupt pretty early on. But then in the 1950s, we got something that's kind of close to what the Lego brick is today. They were just like a little thin and they didn't have those like pegs in the center of them. But then in 1958, they're like, yeah, these guys need a little bit of an upgrade. So then they put the infill on the inside of it and they gave it like the classic Lego pegs. And then from the 50s to the 90s, I know I'm skipping around a little bit, but from that period of time, they had a bunch of really cool sets. They had like a space theme, a pirate theme, and in the 90s they had Johnny Thunder, which was like this Indiana Jones kind of treasure explorer type set. Really cool stuff. I never had any of them, but I always wanted to get some. And even though all these sets that came out in this period of time were super important to LEGO's history, there was one theme that came out in 1977, and when this theme came out, it was known as the Expert series, but you probably know it as the Technic series today. This series basically laid the foundation, or should I say the bricks. And with coming into the turn of the millennia, LEGO is doing pretty good for itself, right? And in the 90s, LEGO was still doing pretty good for itself, coming with the boom from the 70s and 80s. And also in the 90s is when they introduced the Star Wars theme, which is still a theme that exists today. It was by far one of my favorite sets growing up. Like they had Jabba's Palace and they had the Cloud City set. And it's also one of the other reasons LEGO was able to stay afloat. And LEGO was still doing pretty well for itself in the 90s, still from the gigantic boom that they saw in the 70s and 80s. But in the 90s, they introduced the Star Wars set, which as a kid, it was one of my favorite sets growing up, and it's still a theme that they have today. But even with something as cool as LEGO Star Wars, there was something around the horizon that would absolutely take over the store shelves. With all these tech-based toys coming out like Tamagotchi, Game Boys, Furbies, a lot of toy companies like LEGO did not have any stake in the game, so they needed to find something to pivot to, and fast. Also, just a side note, did Furbies creep you out like they did for me? Leave a comment down below if you had a Furby, or if you were like me and they just kind of creeped you out. So with LEGO's pockets not filled with little gold studs, what did they do next? Well, it turned to Paul Plugman, an executive at Bang & Olufsen. And what Plugman did was innovate and foster the most creativity that LEGO had ever seen. Kinda? Plugman definitely did all these things when he started at LEGO, but he ended up spreading the company way too thin and just kickstarting so many weird side projects. Just like Jack Stone over there. But we don't really talk about Jack Stone. And the company kind of suffered from it because they ended up bleeding money like crazy, and then they had to lay off a bunch of their top designers. But thanks to the themes that I mentioned earlier, like LEGO Star Wars and also LEGO Harry Potter, LEGO was able to keep their lights on just a little bit longer. But with fleeting interest in movie-based sets, LEGO needed to find something for itself. LEGO needed to find its own brand identity and own theme to work with. But before we can talk about that, now I know what you're gonna say, when are we going to get to talking about Bionicles? Trust me, this is like the last key piece of information that we need. And where it's at is the 80s. In In 1986, a man by the name of Christian Faber started working with LEGO on a bunch of different marketing projects. But soon after working with LEGO, he started getting super sick and he actually started losing his vision. Over the next 10 years, Faber would take medication just to try to make his vision a little bit better and help him through his day-to-day life. And though the medicine did help him, it made some of his day-to-day life kind of hard, and he ended up working mostly at night. In doing marketing for LEGO, Faber became really familiar with a lot of the different sets, just like the Technic set. Remember how I said it would come into play later? Now's that time. But at the end of that 10-year period, there was actually a medical breakthrough that ended up helping out Faber's condition, and as he put it, he was able to get his life back. And with this newfound energy, it allowed Faber to work on a bunch of projects that he wanted to do for so long, including one called Cybots. I was sitting with LEGO Technic and I thought I would love to build a character instead of a car. I thought of this biological thing. The human body is built from small parts into a functional body, just like a model. What if you got a box of spare parts and built a living thing? Faber and his assistant Jan took these ideas and concepts to LEGO and presented them as a brand new LEGO theme. LEGO initially took these concepts and tried implementing them into a bunch of different themes, like Throwbots and Robo Riders. You guys remember those themes, right? I'm gonna take a guess and say you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. I had no ideas what these were. All of these different themes were scrapped pretty early on, right after they were released. So after failing a couple times, LEGO went back to Faber and his teams and said, okay, you guys take it, you make your own theme. The initial idea was a theme called the Boneheads of Voodoo Island, which it's kind of similar to Bionicles, but it involved the characters' heads being flown off just like Rock'em Sock'em robots. This is also around the time when they came up with the name Bionicle, which I had no idea was a combination of the word biological and chronicle. I feel like it was so obvious. I feel like it was right in my face and I never thought about it, but it makes so much sense. They started making comic books, video games, TV shows. They had a bunch of interactive stuff on a website that you could play on the LEGO site. It was the coolest freaking thing ever. And equipped with all these different things, I think LEGO was finally ready to pull itself out of the financial hole. Picture this. It's the summer of 2001. You just saw a commercial for Legos on the TV, so you immediately go up to your parents. You say, Mom, Dad, I want to get a Bionicle so bad. They're like the coolest freaking thing ever. But then you remember that you're 3 years old and you don't have a job and you can't afford it, and your parents say no because like you're not going to get like a random toy. And then you just wait a couple months. Christmas rolls around and you see one of those plastic tubes under your tree. It's a Bionicle. It's one of the Bionicles you've been asking for. So I was digging around my house to try to find a picture of my Bionicle, maybe me opening it or Christmas, something like that. And even better than finding a picture of it, I found my original Bionicle. This was the one that I got in 2001 after asking my parents for one and finally getting one for Christmas. And I know I wasn't alone because in that very first year of Bionicle coming out, they sold over $160 million worth of the toy, and it was deemed the most innovative toy of 2001. Bionicle just had all the ingredients that every kid wanted. The video games, the absolutely cool toys, and then the ability for any kid or adult to just create their own action figures. The more that you got, you could create different ones, and then I know at the very end of the directions, they would say, oh, if you get these 3 sets, then you can create this super one. Like, it was literally every kid's dream. But don't let this fool you, because LEGO still had to fight tooth and nail to recover, because in 2003, they almost went bankrupt again. But also in that exact same year, Bionicle made up for 25% of LEGO's total revenue and 100% of their profits. And for so many years, Bionicle had cemented itself in LEGO's most successful theme and probably one of the most beloved themes. And every year they came out with new heroes, villains, vehicles, all these new things to add to the ever-expanding lore and everything else that Bionicle had. But even as amazing as this is, as the years went on, it became harder and harder for new fans to get into everything because the lore, I feel like, kind of derailed and it got way too expansive. Because by 2009, the sales for Bionicles had been decreasing significantly than the years before, and then in 2010, Bionicles was discontinued. But something that I found really interesting is this is the exact same thing that happened to He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. They started out with the original characters. It was really great. Everybody loved them. But then every year they started making more and more and more. And then eventually the brand got so diluted that nobody knew who the core characters were. Nobody knew anything about it. It kind of lost that identity, that originality that it had from the start. Bionicle has had an insane impact on LEGO and the fans that have enjoyed it. See, what LEGO did is they took that original marketing that Bionicle had done with the characters, the story, and all the different interactive content, and they started implementing that in some of their next themes. So in 2011, they introduced Ninjago, which was kind of that next step for LEGO and story-based themes. And what I think is kind of wild is that theme still exists today. Like, they're still coming out with Ninjago sets, and the Ninjago sets are actually really cool too. And they kind of have soft rebooted the theme a couple times, but whenever they restart the series, they always keep the core characters the same, the overall like core story. They just improve like the sets or the figures and a little bit of everything, just so then they don't fall into the exact same trap that Bionicle did. And I know that LEGO had made video games previously, but I think through Bionicle, it showed them how important making the video games are to the branding. So they started making LEGO Star Wars games, LEGO Harry Potter games, and up until this point, they have made over 30 LEGO-based video games. And you can tell that there are still so many people that are passionate about the LEGO brand, because there's actually a fan game that's being worked on right now called, I believe it's Bionicles Mask of Power. I'll leave a link to the trailer in the description below. Maybe I'll put it on this wall as well. But it looks like Dark Souls kind of meets Bionicle, this like big expansive world. It looks absolutely incredible, but like I said, I recommend checking out the trailer for yourself. And you might also be wondering yourself, what happened to the creator of Bionicle? In 2014, Faber moved on from his marketing job that he had worked at for over 28 years, and he continues to work on new and creative projects on his YouTube channel called Copenhagen Rig. Also, earlier this year, LEGO released a brick-built version of one of the original Bionicles. I personally wasn't like a huge fan of it. I thought it was kind of cool that they did it. It was just like a little gift if you purchased a certain amount of money. But actually, on his YouTube channel, he ended up opening up that little gift, and he thought it was one of the coolest things, you know, like a little throwback to Bionicles, one of the original masks. And Christian, if you see this somehow, I just want to tell you to keep on innovating, keep on creating, keep on doing all the amazing things that you do on your YouTube channel. I think it's incredible. And that's pretty much it for this video. And I hope I got the general history of everything right. I had to piece together like a bunch of different articles and all these different stories. So if I got anything wrong, please don't eat me up in the comments. I'm sorry. I tried doing my best, but I just saw a bunch of these stories and I really wanted to make a video on it. I also hope you enjoyed this style of video. I had a lot of fun making it, and Bionicles is something that I'm like super passionate about. Same with Legos as well. It's just something that I could just really put my all behind. But if you'll excuse me, I have a plane to go catch to the island of Matanui.